If you're a defense contractor waiting to get started on your cybersecurity requirements, this session is specifically put on for you. Welcome back. My name is Greg Tomchick, CEO here at Valor Cybersecurity, and we've seen a lot in our 3-4 years specifically focused on this space as a company. I went out to start Valor Cybersecurity. I wanted to focus on a specific critical area of our economy that I felt was going to have the most impact from the expertise that I was able to gain. And we're 3-4 years into focusing specifically on defense contractors, and we've seen and felt a lot of the pain points that you as a defense contractor go through, or if you're serving into defense contractors, these are pain points that your customers are navigating that you may not have seen or felt in your service to them up to this point. And we have a couple stories for you today, 2 specific stories, what we call CMMC catastrophe. Really, that's situations when it comes to cybersecurity requirements, or specifically CMMC, that have gone wrong for our clients. So we're going to hit on those specifically today. We've seen so many catastrophes in this space and helped the folks that we serve navigate them. And that's ultimately why we exist as a company, to make these requirements more simple, save time and money throughout the process, and then ensure that the folks that we serve and you listening to this webinar, this training, avoid the things that people have gone through in the past, so we can learn from the past to set up for a better future. And that's why we put this session on today. 2 companies specifically we're going to talk about today where they had gone through the process, signed that they had this in place, and then they're about to get the money released, and they asked, do you have NIST 800-171 in place? Can you send us your system security plan and plan of action and milestones? The first company that I want to tell a little bit about their story is they had a great, amazing product for the warfighter, and they were able to win a big bucket of money to develop this product further, specific for the government's needs. And this was their opportunity as a company to really scale after 5-6 years in business. Done a lot of great things in the private sector, but they always saw the application of their product in the defense space. And they got to the final step, and the government says, we really want to choose you. We know you guys have what it takes to deliver upon this in the quantities that we need. And it was going to take their company from, let's just say $1 million to now 10 million. So they were almost 10xing their revenue just by doing this deal. And the government said, we need to see your system security plan, your plan of action and milestones. And we also noticed you don't have a SPRS score in place. And because they called the government's bluff and they didn't think they were ever going to ask about it, they waited to submit their SPRS score. And when it comes to those 3 elements, system security plan, which is your gap assessment, your self-assessment, your evaluation, putting together all the gaps that are in place, for a lot of companies, out of 110 controls, 320 objectives, typically when they're first starting the process, they'll have, anywhere between 70 and 80 gaps. That breaks down to all kinds of objectives, but that puts them right around a negative SPRS score. And the government typically wants to see at least a positive SPRS score, and that you're working towards that positive number. And they kind of guaranteed themselves they had a negative SPRS score and didn't really know what to implement next to get the biggest bang for their efforts and for their dollar. They came to us, they approached us, they had talked to a couple other vendors before us, and they needed to build a rapid program in order to win this contract that was going to help their company rapidly scale. They didn't necessarily look at it from a budget conscious standpoint. They said, how can we spend dollars to make this happen quicker? And some things are, they're defined from a timeline standpoint. But when it came down to it, we were able to find a number that worked. We were able to get them a system security plan, a plan of action and milestone, and a SPRS score within under the first 30 days, which is, that took every member of our team, around the clock. I wouldn't say 24/7, but it took quite a bit of time to be able to put together a realistic SPRS score and then get them a system security plan and plan of action milestones that ultimately would support that SPRS score, because they were asking for all 3 elements. And as a part of that, we had to help them think about what technical implementations they needed to do next. But it became an immediate scurry, an immediate stressor when the government initially asked it. They had to find a company that was willing to help them expedite the things that they need to prioritize, but also keep in mind that mid and long-term goal of actually continually improving and showing the government through their plan of action and milestones that they actually had a timeline that they planned to implement all of these different objectives based on, and to be able to prove that that was realistic. And they were able to get past the hump, but we felt the stress they had, and every hour, every day that went by without them having somebody engaged that could help them implement what they needed to get to win this contract was extremely stressful, extremely uncertain. A lot of frustration from the leadership side because they felt bad that they didn't take action earlier, knowing that this government contract had been 6, 9, 12 months in the works. It was a catastrophe. It was for the first 10 days or so, there was a lot of heated discussions on why can this not happen quicker. And it was absolutely terrible. I would highly recommend not going through that. And we tried to tell these stories so that if you're getting a government contract, or you have a government contract, there are small ways that you can get started, at least making sure you have a SPRS score, have an SSP that supports it, and the plan of action milestones with a date. If you can get to that point, you're going to reduce a lot of the catastrophe, a lot of the stress that they went through, which is ultimately why I wanted to tell that specific story. The other story is a company that had about 90 to 100 years of Department of Defense experience, and they had a lot of value they've delivered to the Department of Defense over the past, almost 100 years, which is amazing from a historic standpoint. They were the prime contractor on, a number of contracts that were supported by subcontractors. And in today's world, the prime contractor is responsible for overseeing a lot of the compliance that the contracting officer may be enforcing on that contract. And this prime contractor was getting a lot of questions from subcontractors. They even hired a compliance officer. That compliance officer did not have cybersecurity compliance experience. They had more of the facility clearance piece, making sure that they were a cleared facility for security clearances and all of these types of things that we're all familiar with. But they didn't have a cybersecurity background, and they had outsourced IT provider, which was great for them because this IT provider really understood their history. They had been around for 30 to 40 years as well, and they had a great relationship. And the IT provider said, we have you covered, we're good to go. We have, multi-factor. We have a lot of the basics in place from a technology standpoint, a tool standpoint, but they didn't have the ability to prove it. So when the government came back for renewal, this was about a $40 million renewal. It was halfway through a contract. They had to renew it on this time frame. Last renewal, about 2-3 years ago, this was not asked about. They were just asked to sign again to confirm that they were working on NIST 171 and had an SSP, but nobody ever asked about it. And we know now, after 2024, they're asking you to prove it as a part of winning a contract. And this company had already, won it because they had the history, but they had to go to renewal and figure out exactly what were going to be the requirements for this contract going forward. And this was a story that went through the holidays. It was a holiday renewal. They thought they had won it in September when kind of the government, says, we've got our contract set. They have basically said, you won it, but we still have due diligence to go. So as they were approaching the December timeframe, they started to get questionnaires coming in, DD 2345s, which is basically the defense directive, to come in and say, can you answer these questions and then provide the supporting materials as a part of the submission? And they had never been asked to prove it. And they ended up reaching out to us after a couple other conversations. They thought just going to GCC High would get them 100% compliant, which was not true. They were told that by another vendor. If you just go with us and spend 40 to 75 grand on GCC High, you'll be fully compliant. But they were just thinking about how do we get compliant as quickly as possible, because we need to keep this contract or else we lose 40, 50 people. We lose a big percentage of their revenue, their company's future, and there was a lot on the line. We were able to come in and think about what policies and procedures they had in place that would later support the SSP and kind of update those things in concert, at the same time as we were updating the area of the system security plan, say access control. We were able to go to that policy and update it to keep it up to their current state, not their past state 3-4 years ago. We're able to pull their IT company in to get all of their tool sets and make sure that they were up to speed so that they could have an updated SPRS score that was going to align with their documentation. Because what was going to happen is they had submitted a SPRS score in the past, but it was nowhere near accurate because they didn't have a way of calculating it. They were basically just saying, doesn't 80 sound good? They were just basically saying we're doing it, thinking that no one was ever going to ask to prove it. And if they were to submit that before going with a company like us or any other provider out there, they would have basically been called out that this is inaccurate. And that's where false claims come into play, because when they ask you what you're doing and you show them that we said we had 8 of the 10 items, but we really only have 2 or 3, the other language is just templated that we pulled offline or from some template, in a compliance management system. It was extremely catastrophic for them. And we were able to come in and help, but we felt what this did to their company culture, and it made their leaders now have some doubt that the people in the middle management and kind of the analyst level who are supposed to be doing this, or at least advocating for it to top level leadership to get budget for it, weren't advocating for these things. And this was a big monster that showed up in a big way, cost them quite a bit of money because they had spent some money on solutions before engaging a company like us. So that is extra money on the table. A lot of time, a lot of stress, a lot of frustration was expended as a part of this process. So those are 2 catastrophes that we want you to avoid. We put these on each and every week, whether it's to tell a story, to give guidance on what we're seeing as the latest and greatest from a strategy standpoint. But I think a lot of us learn best through story, and hopefully these 2 stories impacted your understanding of CMMC or your cybersecurity requirements. We'll be back next week with a few more points of guidance and stories to help you navigate these cybersecurity requirements now and into the future. Until then, my name is Tomchick. Stay safe and stay secure.